Okay, preparing to live stream.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Luba Vangelova, and I am the founder of The Hub, which is an online platform offering modular education opportunities for tweens and teens that are looking for a blend of customization and community. And I am here today with our two wonderful facilitators who have been with us from the beginning in 2020, Miro Siegel and Brooklyn Wetzel. And we are going to talk a little bit today, just kind of recapping where we are now as we are preparing to enter our third year this September with the Micro Academy and our Friday Forum, and just talk a little bit about where we're at now, what's changed since the beginning, and what we're looking at incorporating and adding going forward. So with, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So as I mentioned, I'm the founder of The Hub, and I have written a lot about self-directed education. And I have also been involved in the founding and running of several homeschool co-ops over the years in Washington, D.C. And then over to the two of you to introduce yourselves, and then I'll get started with questions that I had prepared.
Yeah, my name is Miro Siegel. As Luba said, I am one of the facilitators at the Micro Academy. I have kind of like a lifelong experience with self-directed learner. I was personally self-directed growing up. That was my educational background. And I'm just really excited to be able to continue to bring that to other self-directed learners. I've been with the Hub for about 2 years now. It's been an amazing experience. And yeah, I mean, not much more needs to be said about me. I'll throw it forward.
Hello, my name is Brooklyn Wetzel, and as Luba and Miro said, I'm a facilitator here at the Hub. I'm a self-directed learner. I started like tailoring my high school experience and then really focused on personal and self-directed education as a young adult and as a parent. I facilitate my own children's self-directed education and have been here at the Hub building an online self-directed community. That's really what I see the Hub as, is a learning community. So I feel like that's a really great description of what we've built.
So my screen froze there for a moment. So sorry if there was a gap there, but it seems to be working now. So thank you for introducing yourselves. And so let's just, for people for whom who are not familiar with the Hub yet, if you could just in brief recap what our format is, how it differs than most formats, the goals, the role that you play vis-a-vis the other participants and so on. So if you could just recap that, and if people would like to learn about that in more detail, we do cover that in great detail in our earlier information sessions that are on the Hub's YouTube channel. So you're welcome to dive into the details there. But for now, just a recap, if you will.
One thing I would just want to say straight off is that usually when you're looking at online education and different courses that are out there, they have a predetermined curriculum and a set of, they'd kind of decide they're offering something, some really valuable piece of information, but it's really specific and everybody there is there to learn that one specific thing. And the Hub is really different in the sense of we're bringing together youth of multiple ages with different interests. And then we're developing community together to explore those interests and other things. So instead of having a set curriculum, the world is our curriculum, the internet is our curriculum, and our mutual interests. So I really think that differentiates our program from other online options in the way that we are explorative rather than fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to explain it when I'm trying to explain what I do for work. I like to explain that it is less of a predefined school and more of a like self-directed learners group, right? So it's a social space for learning. A really large part of our focus at the hub actually also has to do with that social learning specifically. So that becomes a really large part of, I guess, kind of the value. We learn a lot about how to navigate social situations. We learn how to navigate, the interests of others, how to communicate, and those things, which are often described as soft skills, I think are some of the most important things that, that the participants are getting out of the hub as well. So that's another really large component of it.
Okay. And so for people who have not perhaps experienced something like this themselves or had their children enrolled in something like this, can you just talk about, how is it determined, how, what will be done each day if there's no set curriculum? I mean, I don't know if, what people might be imagining then, that it's just, chaos, but it doesn't, it does not have the feel of chaos at all. So can you explain how that is, that there's no set curriculum and yet it flows and learning is happening and that there's, forward momentum?
One thing I want to say that kind of is an overarching theme for the hub, in my opinion, is the idea of you get out what you put in, right? And so the experience of the hub, all the time that we spend together, every member is responsible for that as well. It isn't just the facilitators that are guiding all of the time. The participants themselves also have a responsibility and a sense of ownership to organize the time that we have together, how to use it efficiently, and like what to focus on. So everybody's voice is valued, everybody's voice holds equal weight. And that's a really large part of how we organize the days. Do you have anything to add, Brooklyn?
Yeah, I was thinking as facilitators, that's kind of our role in helping the group manage the space and manage the time, is offering up tools and then helping them moderate conversation, stay on the task that the group has set out. So we help the group create goals and then help them meet them through time management and digital school. We use like whiteboards, brainstorming. We make webs, like brainstorming webs of things that we're interested in and things that we've done to look deeper at where we might go with a certain idea. And then we help everyone schedule the time. So we would start off the day kind of just checking in with people and connecting, and then getting ideas for what people want to do and building out a schedule for the day together.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit to give an idea of what the days or weeks look like on a concrete basis? And I know that no two terms are the same, because if the participants are co-creators, and even if it were exactly the same participant group every single term, still, people change over time, their interests change, they mature, they hopefully, and so on. And, we're not static beings. So no two terms are ever going to look alike, even if it were the exact same participants, every single year. But can you talk a little bit to give people a concrete idea of what a day or a week or a term might look like, and kind of the blend between individual work and group projects, and kind of, some things that are just in the moment and other things that span months, that groups are working together for months to create?
Yeah, we tend to, like you said, we employ a mix of all different kinds of activities. We tend we really like to have an ongoing long-term group project for each of the terms, and that gives us something to focus on and kind of collaborate on as the term goes on. But we also employ, sometimes we lean kind of heavily into learning through play. Sometimes it's these group activities. Sometimes we split up more into discussion rooms using the breakout room feature on Zoom, discussion and research rooms. So it really all depends. Like you said, it's really hard to say like, what is the standard day of the hub? As for the structure itself, we have, that's pretty set in stone. We have, we meet twice a week. We've got 4 hours in these sessions, and we're able to kind of chop that up how we see fit with the group. But they're a part of every single one of these decisions. Like there's a long conversation that goes into how we structure every day.
One thing I wanted to add is when we have like I said, we had a check-in and then a brainstorm where we like decide what we might do for the day. And in the beginning, that might be getting ideas for what this long-term project might be, and then making sure we have group time for it. And then there's always time outside of the hub where participants could be working on these projects, and they can put as much effort and commitment into outside of the sessions as they need. And all the projects as well have a lot of flexibility for the participants to contribute in a way that works for them and for their learning style, their interests, their passions. So all of the projects that we've done each semester or whatever have been drastically different, but each one has had that flexibility to allow each participant to get the most out of it for them.
To give an example, a couple of terms ago, the long-term project that we were working on was this large-scale world-building project. And that was really fun because, like Brooklyn said, it opened it up for all these different kinds of mediums, of all these different kinds of contributions to the project, right? So we had maybe some participants who were more interested in writing short stories and kind of creating that side of it. And then we had other participants who were more interested in visual art. We had other participants who were interested in coding, and their contribution was to create a level of a platforming game based on this world building project. And so, yeah, we like to open it up for multiple angles of attack based on, the interests and skills of the participants. And it's great because then we get exposed to all different kinds of things.
And just you mentioned that the group projects have all been very different. Could you maybe mention what was one of the other group projects that, in contrast to the world building one, and also maybe a couple of examples of kind of more short burst activities that you've done, like, whether it's field trips or GeoGuessr or whatever, stands out to you.
One of my favorite little short burst activities from this last term was the Wikipedia game. And so that's where you're like dropped on a random Wikipedia page, and then you have to find your way to another completely different Wikipedia page via the hyperlinks within Wikipedia. And that is a fascinating exploration of connections, and leads us all down science and history and literature and art, all kinds of rabbit holes of learning in that activity. So that's the first one that comes to mind.
That's a really fun one. That's one of my favorites as well. As for another example of a long-term project, in this last term, we were working on a zine. So we were committed, all the participants and the facilitators, we all agreed to commit ourselves to putting out a monthly zine. And that was a lot of fun. The roles shifted around a lot. So one month, one person said, hey, I want to be the editor this month. And, that responsibility shifted around. We had all these different roles into the production of the zine. And that in of itself was a lot of fun. And then the zine was just a really great window, or a really great opportunity to showcase different projects that we were working on together. And also solo projects. So things that the participants were just doing in their own free time that they thought was cool, that they wanted to share with others. The zine was a really great place to do that. So that was really that was a lot of fun. And I think all the parents really enjoyed seeing the zine when we presented it.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. And so just zooming out, no pun intended, to what the goals are of basically an emergent learning experience like this. And I mean, I guess what I would perhaps, the words I would use to encapsulate the goals are to basically help the participants to develop knowledge and skills, and within a social kind of community setting, and to develop the knowledge and skills that they are most interested and therefore ready to actually absorb, and to kind of expand their horizons, develop their knowledge, et cetera, build on their strengths, maybe, work on some weaknesses and so on. But perhaps you two have, other ways that you like to kind of conceptualize it and convey it.
I would go. I just, I think that this kind of environment is really great for building independence and confidence. Just to feel like you can like hold your own and learn independently. There's so much information to understand on the internet, but to know how to find the information that you want and to be confident in social environments like this, sharing your ideas, sharing your creations. I love seeing the participants come into leadership roles like that we offer, because I'm part of facilitating these environments, is creating and offering as much opportunity to take leadership as possible. And it's very rewarding to see kids take those roles and be confident and independent in them. So that's really very rewarding part of this style of learning environment.
I'm in total agreement with Brooklyn. The social, like, self-actualization aspect of it is very valuable. Another thing that I would say, something that I like to think about a lot, is, for me, the goal is not to impart, specific information or specific skills. In my opinion, those things will come. What I think is the most valuable is modeling, or essentially having the participants learn how to learn, right? And so modeling that kind of behavior of, sorry, it was a motorcycle, modeling that kind of behavior and kind of showing how to get the most out of these different tools, such as the internet, such as, just the outside world. I think that that's the most important, because, once the Zoom call is over, they hang up, they go about their lives, but hopefully, they can take some of the things, they can say, like, oh, I remember Miro had a question and he just said, hey, I'm just going to figure that out right now. And he did it. And then we talked about it. I can do that too, whenever I have a question, like stuff like that. Like, I think modeling how to be a self-directed learner in the internet age is really, really important. And so that's really what I hope they take away from it.
And collaboration, learning how to work as a team to build something that that's really rare. That's hard to find, right? And especially in an online environment. Like I had mentioned earlier, usually an online course will be just specifically imparting some knowledge, not building a whole new idea or working specifically on teamwork. So I think that really.
All right. Well, thank you. And like I said, for anyone else who wants to hear a deeper dive into the collaborative decision-making process, the importance of culture and how the culture was built and so on, I invite you to look back through our recordings of the information sessions from the last couple of years, including we did one last year that was specifically for tips that we had gleaned from the first year and a half that other, whether it be professional educators or parent educators, can try to apply in the home or in the classroom setting, et cetera, that might be helpful to build a similar culture and a similar kind of emergent learning environment. All right, so then moving on in terms of, so we've touched a little bit on these next things, but the value that is being offered through the Micro Academy and through the format that it has. And so you've touched on quite a bit of that. Anything else that you would like to add on that in terms of the benefits that it may convey that may not be, immediately obvious from, reading the description on the website, if, kind of connecting the dots between, the experience and how it benefits participants. Is there anything else you would like to add?
One thing I would say is, I mean, we've kind of done away and we don't really utilize the classic Sage on the Stage model of education, right? And so we've decentralized it to an extent, right, where all of the different participants are able to provide different points of interest that we can then further explore. And since the participants themselves have taken that sense of like ownership over this digital space that we've created together, that really, it does keep the group very dynamic and interesting, because every single one of us then becomes a receptacle for knowledge and for potential learning. And I think that is really, it's just really amazing. It's really fun to see where that goes, because sometimes it's very unexpected. But yeah.
The first thought that I thought was digital literacy. I feel like people are often really concerned about how their kids navigate the internet, safety, all those things. And we have an ongoing discussion about that because the internet is our learning platform. So I feel like through, our facilitation and the community, kids get leave the hub or our sessions with a much better understanding of how to safely navigate the internet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Let's see. So can you give some examples of things that, I mean, you mentioned that, each participant is a co-owner and co-driver of the experience. Can you mention some things that were generated, ideas for things that were generated by the participants without, you having had any input in seeding their brains with the ideas, and that were just, coming from the participants themselves?
I remember this one. This is one of my favorites. There was a large request. Some of the participants were very interested in like coding and topics surrounding game design. And I remember putting together a couple of breakout rooms over the course of weeks and months, actually, where they would just want to get together, brainstorm ideas for this game that they were going to be working on together, talking about what engine it was going to be running on, talking about the style for the pixel art, talking about game mechanics, all of these different things. And this came purely from them. This was what they were interested in doing. This is how they want to collaborate, and this is what they wanted to develop. And I remember sitting in, really, because it was them. They had the reins. I was sitting in on this one and providing input and feedback, but just being amazed at like how they were working together and what they were coming up with, the ideas that they were throwing out. And I remember being very, very impressed on that one. But all kinds of also smaller scale activities. A good number of the games that we like to go back to for warm-ups. A lot of those were suggested by participants over the years, some of which are not with us anymore, but we continue to use those games because the group just loves them for warm-ups. So yeah.
We had a debate club that was started by a participant and had many sessions, and other participants joined, and it was half debate, half impromptu speaking. I have experience in speech and debate as a youth, so I shared that information, and we kind of explored what speech and debate was about, and had some debates about some fun subjects. So
and dedicated research time, that was a part of that, I remember. And I remember we really delved into some interesting topics. The one I thought was most interesting was, one day, I can't remember, but one of the participants asked a question, which was, who owns the stuff in space, right? And I was like, that's a great question. I don't really know. That's a great question. Let's figure it out. And then we did a bunch of research, and then a debate spawned from that, which was kind of this question of like, what does ownership mean? What does it mean if somebody were to own an asteroid? Like stuff like that, and kind of exploring also the ethics of it. Like, what do we think is right? All of that. Really interesting. It was a really interesting conversation.
What's going on with space garbage? I mean, it went all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think this also, just listening to the two of you and how, clearly you're also learning things and are interested in it. I mean, so it kind of, I think, goes to show, how much the level of thinking and discourse that children ages, we've had mostly 10 to 14 so far. The level of thinking that, it's kind of developing your skills and knowledge also. I mean, it's, not to underestimate, the kinds of things that, younger people can think about and process and really kind of, analyze and have considered opinions on. So I think that's worth noting. And so how, since not only do we not have a curriculum, but shock, we don't give tests or grades. And so given that, how do we know that the children are developing their knowledge and skills and are having a good experience and that the goals are being met? I mean, on my end, I get feedback from parents, and, so I hear from parents, and, the feedback has been, I would say, quite overwhelmingly, enthusiastic and positive about what they've been seeing on their end. As facilitators, from your perspective, how do you know that, the goals are being met and that the children are developing?
I like to take a little bit more of a direct approach and just ask sometimes, and just do like a check-in, right? So we have designated times for one-on-one check-ins with each of the participants. And that's a really great opportunity to kind of check in, see where they're at. And we also have open times during the sessions for kind of group check-ins. But aside from that approach, I think since social learning is such a huge part of the program, the way that the participants themselves interact with one another and with the rest of the digital space at large, for me, is a really good indicator that the participants are doing well, right? So, we've got a couple of participants that have been with us for some time now, like over a year. And I have noticed quite the difference, right? And just a lot of social growth and learning. And it's kind of hard to, I guess, to measure that. But it's definitely there. And of course, there are also more tangible ways in which that manifests, right? So participants sharing projects, things that they've been working on outside of the hub, coming in and, giving updates. That's always something we encourage as facilitators. So that's another good way.
I can always tell when a participant is growing in the space as they become more confident, more independent. And then, as I said earlier, they start taking on leadership roles. We offer opportunities for them to facilitate their own breakout room around the discussion that they're interested in, or to lead the activity, bring an activity. And that's when I can really tell that that they're growing and coming into themselves as a learner.
And Miro, you mentioned that it can be hard to measure. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the important, skills and knowledge in life is not easy to measure. It's like, are you a good leader? How do you measure that? You are a 7 leader. What does that mean? It's like, yes, a lot of it, I think, comes down to observation, being observant and kind of noticing changes over time. The way the parents also notice at home, when the participants bring up things that they've been discussing at the hub, or kind of just, or hear them in the other room, talking, in an engaged way. I mean, I think often level of engagement can be a quasi measure, a qualitative measure.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely. And if I may, I mean, we do
mhm,
spend quality time with the participants, right? Like a really large part of our role as facilitators is just being present, right? Being
mhm,
here when they ask questions and then building on that, being here and noticing things and building on those things, right? And so, yes, it is hard to measure on paper. Yes, so his leadership skills have increased and it doesn't really exactly work like that. But because we are spending so much great time with them, you do notice these changes over time. So yeah,
okay.
it's really great.
All right. And so what are some things that you have learned, since you're effectively also, in a sense, participants? What are some things that stand out to you that you have learned?
Hmm. I go. So I think the question for me is kind of twofold. So on the one hand, I learn a lot from the participants directly, right? From the things that they are bringing to the group and things that they're sharing. For example, I mentioned it briefly, topics such as like coding, didn't know anything, or like 3D modeling. I was not very familiar with these things before. That was not really my focus. But I've learned a lot just based on the things that the participants have brought in and watching them explore these topics as well and supporting them in that. But on the other hand, I also really learn a lot since I started with the hub. I've learned a lot more about the things that I'm also excited about, right? Because these are things that I'm excited to share with the group.
Mm,
So that might look like, interesting stories, history that I've come across, or like interesting cultural practices that I think the group will find interesting. And so I've also been kind of more incentivized in my own learning, because I'm excited to bring these things,
mhm,
every Tuesday and Thursday when we meet up.
mhm,
So it's great in that way. The hub has also really facilitated my own learning because that's the kind of self-directed initiative that we're trying to model, right?
mhm,
I I was thinking about time management. I feel like I've learned a lot about helping manage time in a digital space, and how long things will take. Over the course of I kind of understand how long it will take the group to get together, check in, and then move into an activity, and how long an activity actually takes, how many activities we can actually fit in. That these kind of things I feel like I've learned over time, that have been really helpful. Probably going to be especially helpful going into this new term, just that experience. So
all right. And so that brings up something, how do you, since participants bring in their interests and, people's interests don't necessarily overlap, how have you been dealing with kind of making that equitable, and so no one feels like, starts becoming bored because whatever's being discussed is just not their area of interest? I mean, have you had that be an issue? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
I would say so far it's been pretty good, honestly. We have some agreements that essentially talk about respect as being one of the main pillars and one of the things that allows for this space to even exist in the first place. And there's this implicit understanding that, okay, well, one day if we're going to be exploring this topic and because this person is interested in it and they brought an activity or something to discuss or explore, there's also this implicit understanding that that also means because I'm giving the space to this other person, that that person will give the space to me, you know, at some other time, maybe even in the next session, right? So it really is a give and take. And I think that we've been able to navigate it pretty well so far. I can't think of any hiccups immediately. I'm sure it's happened a couple of times, but it's been fine.
We have a lot of flexibility and we do a lot of checking in with our participants. So we'll know before we start an activity whether or not we have engagement in it. And then if we don't, we'll split into different groups or figure out how, you know, how can we create an activity how can the activities, maybe we need multiple activities, you know, but nobody's ever forced to do things that they, you know, they don't want to do. And then that is always, you know, if you're in a group with somebody who doesn't want to be there, that's not helpful to the group. So we try to make sure that everybody is, you know, willing to do whatever it is. And if not, we create other opportunities, right? It's not a shaming thing. It's nothing, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. Not everybody wants to do everything the same all of the time. And we figure out how to accommodate for everyone. And that's part of the social emotional learning we were talking about as well.
Okay. All right. Since there's a lot of flexibility and freedom given, so I think one of the things that parents hope, most, if not all parents hope for their children to develop is a sense of accountability and responsibility and follow through. So do you see that as at odds in any way with having the freedom and flexibility? I mean, are those two things congruent or, you know, can they align?
I think those two things are absolutely in alignment. And I think it comes back to the idea of ownership over like the way that you spend your time, right? So if a participant is, you know, engaging in a project or an activity because they want to be, because they chose to do it, I think that they're much more likely to be accountable, right? Rather than saying, okay, well, I didn't really want to do this anyways. I was just doing it because the teacher said I had to. And, you know, it's not really coming from them. But when it's something that they've chosen, yes, I do think accountability is a really large part of that. I don't think they're at odds whatsoever.
And social accountability is really important. You're accountable to the group, and the group, we're friends, you know, we're the community. So you're accountable beyond just like an obligatory commitment.
Okay. All right. And so can you contrast a little bit an online experience versus in-person experience? I mean, of course, both of you have also been involved in, you know, leading and participating in various in-person experiences. So what are some of the challenges and how you've overcome them? I mean, obviously, online is different than in person, and there are pluses and minuses to each one. So what are some of the challenges of the online format, how you've overcome them, and also some of the benefits, especially some that may not have been obvious or expected?
I mean, of course, the physical distance presents a definite obstacle at times, which I'm sure that's something that all educators over the last few years would agree on. But at the same time, I definitely would argue there are some positives. I think the online space, it grants all the participants a lot of autonomy, right? And that can be really fulfilling. So this kind of space only works when there's buy-in, and like Brooklyn said, it really only works when the participants themselves want to be there. They have to want to be there. And a part of that is participants being responsible for problem solving as well on their end. There's only so much that the facilitators can do from our end of the screen, right? And so, yeah, the participants have this kind of like heightened autonomy in problem solving, which is also it can be a challenge at times, but it's also really fulfilling and really empowering when the participants succeed in solving their own problems, right? And that's something that gives you a lot of confidence, and they bring that to the group as well.
This is probably a place, I think, where the hub really differs from other online programs that might be more passive. The hub really requires a lot of engagement. And so we're having a circle, we're all engaging with each other, and it isn't a passive Zoom experience. And I really agree with Miro about autonomy and the ability to explore and be yourself. Sometimes, it can be challenging to keep people's attention. Again, that's kind of our role as facilitators, to help model good attention in virtual spaces, and being good digital citizens. Our job is to model that and to help build a healthy digital community, which is something that many people are living with daily in the modern work world. So, working in a digital space is just as valuable as learning how to work in a live space at this point. So,
absolutely. And another thing is that, this is kind of a unique bonus, I guess, to having this digital space, is that we're all in different places physically, right? And so this is a really great opportunity to learn about the world, to learn about different cultures, learn about different ideas, what's happening in other parts of the world. So we like to utilize that and also draw from that. There's so many different things.
We can invite
those
people in from all over into our space, and we can
That's true.
on virtual field trips, like live virtual field trips, exploring places that none of us are at. Which
also.
is
Right. Like, I mean, just to give two examples, like, the two that you've done in the past year, one in France, one in Belize, and then, we've got participants on, in Europe, in the US, and, we've got someone in Mexico, we've got people around different parts of the US. And yeah, so it's interesting how like just organically, the participants can learn about things that come up in the everyday lives of other people that those people take for granted, but that are actually quite novel.
So we had like pen pals when I was a kid. This is an upgraded version.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I forgot about pen pals. So anything else that you would like to call out in terms of strategies you've used to leverage the strengths of the online format? I mean, the virtual field trips would be one example, including, I guess, where you actually had people walking around a space in another country, but in an interactive way where it wasn't just, imparting information, but where the participants actually got to kind of help decide where to go and what, based on questions and where the discussion was going and so on. But any other ways that jump out at you in terms of strategies to leverage the online format?
I think one of the largest pitfalls with the online, like transition to online, is that people try to just directly translate what works in the physical in-person space to an online space. It doesn't really work like that. Like you kind of have to get creative and change things around. I would say a really big tip is use as many tools as you can. Like that's one of the really great things about being online, is that there's so many different tools and things that we can use together to facilitate different kinds of projects and all of that. But you really have to be active in searching out these things and in putting them into practice as well. All of these little functionalities in Zoom right here. Even the little emotes that you can do, right? We've right, like little laughing face up here. We've utilized these and coded them to mean different things, right? So that helps in communication. Really use everything and use it creatively. And that's the way that you can start to get a little bit more engagement, I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how over the course of as digital learning in these spaces have developed more, we've explored it more of, oh, check this out. We can, change our whole Zoom to look like we're somewhere like on a beach. And, we're exploring these new tools together and bringing them to the group, and people in the group are bringing them, and it creates a really vibrant learning environment.
And you mentioned like online whiteboards, collaborative whiteboards, where people can, anyone can add, comment, etc. And then the like GeoGuessr, where you just get plunked into some random place around the world and kind of zoom around in it and try to, other people try to figure out from the clues that they see in the background where you are, and learn, geography and cultures and so on. So yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting possibilities out there. And so
keep it playful. There's a lot of different things you can do. Keep it playful.
Oh, that's great. Just the glasses are missing, except, well, the raccoon eyes kind of look like the glasses, but and so how different has each term been? I mean, what have been the similarities and what have been kind of the main differences?
Well, I think that every term we've been playful and serious, because we've accomplished our goals and created some really amazing things. But throughout every term, we have a playful spirit. And so that's something that I think we've maintained. Each term is obviously different because the kids' interests are different and they want to try something different. So even if we have some of the same participants, they don't want to do the same project all over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's a really fun experience to like exploring what we might do and then figuring out what we're going to land on that'll work for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like Brooklyn said, of course it varies widely based on the participants. Because not only does the program itself cater to them, but the participants themselves also cater to the program, right? So they also adapt based on the interests of others, based on the learning style of the others in the group. So everybody kind of comes together to try and find something that works a little bit more for everyone. And naturally, this also applies to us as facilitators. And I think one of my biggest lessons, or the biggest things I've realized surrounding that, or we've realized together, is that it's best not to get too attached to like the preconceived idea of what we should be doing, or how we should be spending time, like these prescriptive ideas that we have from the outset. And yeah, I mean, especially when there's something that works better for this specific group of learners, right? And that's something that we have to discover together. So I think that has kept it very fresh as well. Every experience is very unique, and it develops organically over the course of the term too. It's always a work in progress.
Okay. And what are some things that have turned out differently than expected, where you have pivoted for whatever reason, and what were some reasons that pivots occurred? What some examples?
I would say after the first term, I've tried not to come into it with any expectations. So I guess I've kind of saved myself a little bit of pain on that one. But as for the pivot aspect, like how have we pivoted parts of the program? I mean, the content is always pivoting, right? Because we may tire of one activity, or we may become interested in a new one. But the structure itself also is in constant movement, constant transformation. So, I mean, for example, we've added and axed entire sections of our schedule. We've moved around breaks, implemented, custom systems for planning and communication at the start of our days. Sometimes they work for one group and sometimes they don't, and it's okay because we're not attached to any one specific one. So if it doesn't work, we'll drop it, right? And we'll figure something else out that works better. And yeah, all of these changes are made just in accordance with the group's needs, right? So the schedule and the structure itself is also subject to change based on what works best for this group.
Yeah, so the program, because it doesn't have like things set in stone in terms of curriculum and so on, there's a lot of room to be flexible and adaptive and as you said, kind of keep up with the interests. And if you're keeping up with the interests, I mean, that's kind of the sweet spot of when people are kind of absorbing things. If it's, you know, in their, if they're engaged and interested, and if something isn't working, you know, pivot, like you said. I think that's a good thing to call out. And any kind of tips that you would, you know, at this point now, 2 years, you know, under your belts, anything that you would, you know, think others might perhaps want to consider trying that wouldn't have occurred to you, but you tried them out, they worked, and so on, whether it's about resolving differences, kind of, you know, group dynamic challenges in the online environment, just anything that you had to kind of figure out as you went along, because, you know, no one can anticipate everything, obviously, but that might be useful to other people to kind of maybe keep in their tool chests or in the back of their minds.
One of the things that sticks out to me, and I'm a creator and an artist myself, and when I'm working on a project, I may have a certain idea of how it's going to look. Or what it's going to be like, and I can get really attached to that. But in a creative community and as a facilitator, can't really be attached to how something specifically might look, right? And so you want to be as accepting and as, you know, open to all of the different ways that creativity can blossom. And that, you know, means letting go of a lot of your preconceived notions of what finished is and what good looks like, because you're trying to get the participants to their good, not the good that you have created in your mind, right? So I feel, yeah, that's what comes to mind most of all.
And I guess for me, it's just build off of the participants, right? Don't build off of your own program or your own idea, right? This prescriptivist idea of what should be. Build off of what you see the participants reacting to, right? And this could also just be like, yeah, little questions that turn into much larger activities and really great vehicles for deeper learning and exploration, that if you were to kind of just brush it off, it would never become that. Right. So really just, you have to take what is given to you and then use that rather than, you know, kind of putting forth your own path, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what the visual metaphor that comes to mind when you mention that is the idea of kind of the metaphor of surfing. You know, you're not trying to force the waves, you're looking instead for the waves or the promise of a wave, and then you're getting ready, and then you're kind of seeing where the momentum will take you, until it plays itself out, and then you look for another wave and kind of surfing the waves of, you know, education. All right, and then before I get to the question of some of your highlights from the past, for these first 2 years, if you could just also just briefly mention the Friday Forum, our other standalone program, the 1 day a week, shorter form program, and just very briefly explain in what ways it's the same as the Micro Academy in terms of format and how it differs.
I would say the overall ethic, like the philosophy, is very much the same in that it's non-hierarchical. It, you know, depends on every participant's buy-in. Like, they all have to want to be there, and they all have a similar stake in the program. But the actual format itself is a little different in how we explore topics. I mean, we do a lot of the stuff also in the Micro Academy, but the Friday Forum is specifically focused on exploration through dialogue, right? and kind of delving deeper into topics, yeah, through discussion and through conversation. And so, yeah, that's the gist of it, really.
It's a shorter time period.
Yeah, it's a shorter meeting.
Okay. All right. And so between the two of those things, then the Micro Academy and the Friday Forum, and I mean, we've also offered summer camps, but let's just keep it to the things that we have done on a regular basis. And we've done a workshop, you know, during one of the academic terms before, but just keeping it to the core elements, the Micro Academy and the Friday Forum. Just to end on this, you know, what are some of your highlights from the last 2 years? And actually, sorry, and so not quite an ending. That's the penultimate. But then, and how do you hope to build on that going forward into this next year that starts in mid-September?
Well, one of my highlights from the first year is, you know, it was the 2020 and the pandemic, and maybe the nature of that year made it this way, but it was a small and really close group. And, you know, and we just built a really strong friendship, and that will always like be a highlight for me of that year. And then this last year, again, really beautiful group, beautiful friendship. And the highlight there is we created this, every month we were creating a zine. So we had a series of all of our creative work that people were putting in. And I was just really impressed with how much commitment the kids had to that project and how much we accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, really, the warmest memories are all relational, right? Like just thinking back, like, yeah, we've forged some really great, genuine connections, like friendships with these participants too. And that definitely, looking back, I mean, that gives me the warmest feeling, right? That's like the most fulfilling. Like, for example, that zine, in the last issue, the participants conspired to create a secret page that was a dedication to say thank you to facilitators. And we didn't know about it until we opened it up on that last session. We were going over it and presenting it. And yeah, it was just really, really touching. I think definitely, as for like specific moments for my highlights, it probably has to be the final session for all of the terms, really. And I remember crying a couple of times, shedding a couple of tears in those last, you know, so in the last session, the parents come in and we do a final presentation. We share what we've been working on for this long-term project. And then they log off and we have our last half hour all together as a group. And it's a really special moment because this is the last time slot we have together as, you know, as this specific group, because some participants might not be coming back. Other participants might be joining us. The group won't ever be completely the same, right? And just sharing that last little bit of time together and kind of reminiscing and talking about like what we really enjoyed and yeah, all of that, it always brings a tear to my eye. So I would say that's definitely that's the highlight for me.
Getting rickrolled one last time.
Yeah, that happened this last time. Yeah.
And then just looking forward, so as I mentioned, our next term starts in mid-September, and we do accept enrollments on a rolling basis as long as there's enough space. And by enough space, like everything else, it's a judgment call, you know, as long as it feels doable to add, you know, more people without it being an impediment to the group dynamics. So, and that would differ, you know, with each term, each set of participants. So we don't have an exact specific cutoff that just remains static. Again, we adapt to, you know, what is happening in the moment. But if you could just talk about, you know, what kind of, I mean, obviously the core principles and format, et cetera, of the hub will be the same. What are you most looking forward to doing this year, and any new things that you plan to add that are worth noting, right? That you already know that you're going to add. I mean, of course, as you mentioned, new things happen that, based on the participants, but anything that you would like to just kind of tease out at this point?
I'm really excited to see what kind of field trips and opportunities we have, and kind of involving the larger community, or the community at large as well, and seeing what comes from that. That's always really exciting. I mean, of course, I'm also excited about the things that I'm going to bring, and I've got a couple of ideas already, but that's always really exciting because you don't really know, it's all kinds of different stuff that you could get exposed to and learn about when it comes to field trips and guest speakers. So that's probably what I'm most excited for. And of course, meeting new participants and delving into their interests and helping them explore that, and also learning about it myself.
I'm excited. I've got like a master list treasure trove of all the websites and activities that we've been doing over the last 2 years, and some other ones that I found that we might want to try. So I'm excited to have that, to explore that list with the participants and see what else they might have to add to it. And I've already worked out a few speakers I'm really excited to come and like play with us. And share their stories. So that's what I'm looking forward to most of all, and meeting the new people, as Nora said.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Pretty much almost exactly on the dot 1 hour here. Wow. There's always so much we could say, but we'll just end here, and looking forward to this next term. If anyone is interested in enrolling, you can go to thehub.community and look for the tab that is called Apply. And that spells out the very straightforward application process we have. And if you have any questions for us, there's a contact form on the website. And we hope you've enjoyed learning more about this with us. And thank you, Brooklyn. Thank you, Miro. And looking forward to the fall term soon. Okay, goodbye, everyone.